Hey everyone, this is Brian from ActiveMelody.com. Well, normally I start off these lesson videos with me playing through the melody so that you get an idea if this is a lesson that'll be interesting to you or not. But I didn't want you to have a preconceived notion, so I didn't want to start with that. I'll get to it in just a minute. But I wanted to just say that I think this will be a breakthrough lesson for a lot of you. And the reason for that is I know that a lot of you get stuck when it comes to improvising. You've learned your scales, and you've got a few licks that you can play, but it sounds like you're repeating yourself or you're just playing through a scale. And so this lesson is all about taking chord shapes and making a very purposeful sounding, if that's how you would say it, or a more meaningful lead. It sounds more melodic. And what we're going to do is we're going to take chord shapes and we're going to connect them using arpeggios. And there's two patterns I'm going to show you. And I honestly think that this will be a big light bulb moment for a lot of you. And so now let me go ahead and show you a melody. Now this is a simple melody. This isn't Eddie Van Halen, but there's a lot behind this. And what I'm really doing is I'm just playing three simple chords. It's a C and an F and a G, and I'm connecting them with arpeggios. And I'm going to show you how to do this. So let's go ahead and take a listen. Alright, so I've got this lesson split into two parts. In this video, we're going to take a look at all of the background information. I'm going to show you the two patterns that I mentioned, and I'm going to show you how to connect chord shapes using arpeggios. So all the background information in this video. If you'd like to watch the part 2 video, which is where I'll show you how to play the melody, everything that I just played, note for note, break it down. I've got the tablature, I've got the MP3 jam track that you can practice along with, and in fact I've got the MP3 jam track in 3 different keys. So you've got one in the key of C, one in the key of D, and one in the key of E. So that'll allow you to practice this in multiple keys and really get comfortable with it. You can get all of that information at ActiveMelody.com. Just look for EP164. That's a lesson number for this lesson. But let's go ahead and get started with part 1, all of the background information. Alright, so to get started, I want to start by sharing my mindset when I'm playing a lead or when I'm trying to create a melody, something that sounds interesting. And so the first thing I think about, the first thing you got to do is you have to find the key that the song is in. And actually, it would be a good lesson if you haven't watched it. I have a lesson. You can go to ActiveMelody.com and go to the lessons section and do a search for EP160. Watch that video if you haven't, because I explain how to find the key a song is in, and a couple of other things that'll be of use to you. But anyway, I'm going to assume that knowledge. And so the first thing I do is I find the key. Now the next thing I do is I think of there's 3 levels in terms of complexity. And this is oversimplifying, but just bear with me. So the first level is, once we find the key, and let's assume we're in the key of C. That's what this jam track is that I started with. So let's start with that. And it doesn't matter, by the way, if it's a blues in C or if it's country in C. If it's in the key of C, level 1 in terms of complexity would be finding either the minor or the major pentatonic scale and just staying there. So in other words, let me demonstrate that. So if the song is in C and your first chord is a C, I'm going to play something out of the major pentatonic scale. Right? So that works. A little melody, lead part. I'm just playing notes out of the major pentatonic scale for C. Now, even though the chord now changes to an F, or we go to our 4 chord, I still stay in C major pentatonic scale. Back to the C. So what I'm doing there, all these little licks, they're all out of the major pentatonic scale for C. Now I could do that even though the chords are changing, even though there's an A minor in there. It would work as well. It doesn't matter. I'm staying in C. So that's one path. That's easy. Level 2 is we're going to mix the major pentatonic scale with the minor pentatonic scale for C. So the reason you do that is it gives you the happy, which is major, and it gives you the sad, the more bluesy stuff, which is minor. So I could go back and forth between those two scales, still staying in C. I'm not matching the scale to the chord. I don't even care what the chords are. I'm just staying in C. So if there's the C chord, there's your major. Now let's throw in a minor, which will give it a little bluesy. This will be C minor pentatonic scale. So there's the F chord. Back to your C major. There's your G. And there's your C. You can see what I'm doing. I'm kind of making this up, so it's not great work, but I'm trying to illustrate a point here. And that is that that's what level 2 is to me. It's going back and forth. I'm mixing up the major and minor. It starts to sound interesting. Now the highest level, and that's what we're going to learn in this lesson, which will be level 3, is how do you switch the scale to match the chord. And it can kind of blow your mind in the beginning when you think, wait, I got to change scale, so there's 3 chords in this, so I've got to go through 3 scales and remember where I'm at. It's not that difficult. As long as you know how to play your chords in different positions, I'm going to show you a very easy way to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to learn, so we're going to start with C. We're going to assume some things in C, and then I'll show you how to transpose it. It's very easy to transpose any key. But most of you probably know how to make a C chord, and you probably make it down here, first position. Well, we're not going to make that chord shape. In fact, we're not going to make any chord shapes in first position because there's open strings, and it can actually be somewhat confusing. So I'm going to step it up to a little higher position on the neck, and we're going to make our C chord here. This is using the A chord shape. This is out of a system called Caged, C-A-G-E-D. And I won't get into that for this lesson, but what I'm doing is if you know how to make an A chord down in first position, I'm just sliding it up, using my finger as a capo here, and I'm making the C chord shape there. And now I use my pinky here. A lot of people use their ring finger. However you make the chord, that's the chord shape. And I'm only playing strings 5, 4, 3, and 2. So the bar is here on the 5th fret. That's strings 4, 3, and 2. That's pretty easy, just a straight bar. And then I just have my index finger here on the 3rd string, the 3rd fret, 5th string. There's your C chord. Now we're going to connect that C chord to this one. Now all I'm doing here is I'm playing another C chord, but I'm using the E chord shape. What do I mean by that? So you know how to make an E chord down in first position, right? We're just going to slide that chord shape up all the way up so that we're barring here on the 8th fret. And that becomes a C chord shape, or C chord using the E chord shape. So now we have a C chord here and a C chord here. Now let's connect those 2 chords, and we're going to do that using an arpeggio. Now what is an arpeggio? Well, an arpeggio is it's just a broken chord. I think that's the literal definition of it. But it's just taking a chord, and instead of strumming it like this, where you hit all the notes at once, you're going like this. You're picking the notes out of the chord. That's really all an arpeggio is. Typically with a chord, you play the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th interval of the major scale. So if we're counting the C major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we repeat our 1, it's just an octave higher, right? So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're playing the 1, 3, and the 5. That's your chord. Those are your major chords. So now that we've got our 2 chord shapes, let's connect them. And we're going to connect them using the 1, 3, 5 intervals of an arpeggio. So what I do is I think about the root fret. So if I'm making this chord shape, for example, I think of my low C note, which is here. This is you should always remember, be very comfortable with your 5th string and your 6th string, the notes on your 5th string and 6th string. There's a lot of people that'll tell you, oh, you got to memorize the notes all over the neck. Well, you can and you should, but start by, and I'll be honest, I don't have them all memorized, but I do on the 6th string and the 5th string because I know this chord shape, so I know that's a C, 3rd fret there, 5th string. I also know that 5th fret, that's a D, and so forth and so on. The reason that's important is we're going to start this little arpeggio exercise, and I actually have you can play this along if you're a premium member. You can download the jam track and practice this with it. But if you don't, that's okay. You can still follow along and learn this. We're going to start here on the 3rd fret, 5th string, and then we're going to go to the 5th fret, 5th string, and we're going to slide up. As soon as we hit it, we're just going to slide, almost skipping past it, slide up to the 7th fret, 5th string. And then watch this. I'm just going to put my bar back down here on the 5th fret so that I can play string 4 and 3. So we have... And look what I just did here. If you think about it visually, this is why it's important to always tie everything back to a chord shape. See our chord shape there? See my little bar? I've got the same bar now, so we're playing the same notes. The only difference is our bass note, which is down here on the 7th fret, 5th string. So instead of being here, we have the bass note here. So in essence, that's really another voicing of the C chord. You can do it here or here. But I'm not thinking of it that way. I'm just thinking of the arpeggio. So I'm going... So practice that. Now watch this. From here, we're going to connect up to that C chord that I showed you. But we're not going to play the whole chord like that. We're just going to play the top 3 strings of it. So watch this. See that? So we started all the way down here on the 5th fret. I'm sorry, the 5th string, 3rd fret. We did the slide up. There's the bar there on the 5th fret, string 4, 3, and then I put my middle finger down on the 7th fret, 3rd string, and I slid from the 7th fret up to the 9th fret, barred the first 2 strings on the 8th fret, and played string 2 and 1. Now that's just your C chord. But look where it is in reference to this chord, and look how you can connect those chords now. What you've done essentially is you've played an arpeggio up the neck, but you're not memorizing things that aren't familiar. These are all you're just playing the chords. Now why that's important is when you're soloing, and if it's a blues even, doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be country. If there's a C part in the song, instead of you just going to the minor pentatonic scale, if you're playing notes right out of those chord shapes, it's going to sound a lot more melodic and a lot more sophisticated. You're going to sound like you really know what you're doing, because in fact you do. So this is how I want you to practice this. If you put on the jam track, if you don't have the jam track, just set a metronome, but practice it going like this. Now I've also got the tab for that as well, if you need to download that. And so that's the C part. Now we're going to move on. We're going to learn the F part. So when the F chord happens, or the 4 chord, probably better to say the 4 chord, because then it doesn't matter what key you're in. But what I'm doing is I'm playing an F chord down here in first position. Some of you know it like this. Some of you do the full bar chord. It's just the E chord shape, by the way. Just slid up 1. And we're just barring there. Now, so you need to know this chord shape, which you've already done, by the way. That was when you did the C chord shape up here on the bar on the 8th fret. This is exactly the same thing. You're just on the 1st fret. So you know that chord shape. Now the next one is here. Now there's 2 ways you can look at it. You can think of, well, let me show you the one way that you probably know. If you're making the D chord shape, you just slide it up here so that your index finger and middle finger are on the 5th fret. Now to make it a little more full, you can bar the first 4 strings on the 5th fret there, you put your middle finger down on the 6th fret 2nd string, and then your ring finger on the 7th fret 4th string. And that's a D chord. Now this goes into, another way to think of this is the Keith Richards stuff, which I always go back to. He does these little hammer-on chords, and that's, so if you're in A, you can go from an A to a D. That's all I'm doing. Now I'm only playing strings 4, 3, and 2. I'm not, well, I can play the 1 string as well, because that's behind the bar there. But that's an important chord shape, because now you've got this chord shape, so that's an F here, you've got an F here, and we're just going to stop there on connecting those 2 shapes. But now we're going to have the arpeggio connect the 2. So just like we did with the C chord shape, Remember, with a C. Now we're going to do it with the F. Now, so the reason why I said it was so important to know your notes on the 5th string and on the 6th string is when you know that this is an F note, and you know that it's connected to this F chord here. So if you're in a song and you're playing an F, all of a sudden this fretboard will light up to you in terms of playing a lead, because now I know I can go from here, I can go play that 1st fret 6th string, put my ring finger on the 3rd fret 6th string and do a slide up to the 5th fret. This is very similar to what we did with that C chord shape. It's exactly the same little skip in terms of skipping frets. Okay, so we're up to the 5th fret 6th string. Now I'm going to put a bar down on the 3rd fret and I'm going to play 5th string and 4th string. So you can see what I just did there. And then watch this. Now we're going to put our ring finger down. This is how we connect it to that other chord shape I just showed you. Ring finger goes down on the 5th fret 4th string, and it slides up to the 7th fret on the 4th string. And then once it's in position, we can put our other 2 fingers down and make the rest of that chord. So what we've done is we've used these arpeggios to walk from this chord to this chord. Now we could keep going. I just didn't want to make this lesson too complicated. But I wanted to start you with 2 chords, and I'll continue this in a series if this is really valuable, and show you other ways we can do minor chords, we can start connecting them. But this is like getting at the heart of really playing a good sounding melodic lead. Okay, so let's use the same picking pattern that I showed you for the C chord, and now we'll play it with the F chord as well. So we're going to go back and forth. So here's how it's going to sound melodically. So if you've got the jam track, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, then it'll start and we go. Back to the C. Now we go to the G. Now the G is exactly the same as the F. So if you've learned the F, how to connect this chord shape to this, you've also learned how to connect this chord shape to this. So that's why this is so important, is once you get these little patterns down, or however you want to, whatever you want to call them, it works in any key. So if you were playing G sharp, something in G sharp, that way you don't necessarily have to know that this is a G sharp and this is a G sharp. Maybe you don't have this memorized yet, but by just feeling your way through this arpeggio, you can get right up to it, and you can keep going with it if you wanted to as well. So one other thing to point out is if you look at this, there's really just 3 chord shapes that are just being repeated. You have this chord shape, you have this chord shape, and then you have the D one, which would actually look like, I don't have a cutaway so I can't get to it with my fingers, but it's the one that the Keith Richards thing, right? So that's where the C version of that would be. So even though we started with a different pattern or different chord voicing with our F, once we went up to this, that's familiar, it's just like the C one there, right? And then if I kept going, there's that A chord shape, just like we did with the C. So you can see what happens is it just keeps repeating itself, that pattern. So really with those 3 different chord voicings, this one, and this one, you've got all of this that you can do now. Now all you have to do is just connect those chords using those arpeggios. And I just showed you one way to do it. Obviously you can keep going, you can play them on higher strings. But I've been able to do a lot just with what I showed you. When I play lead now, I find myself mentally going there. If I know the key a song is in, and especially like with C, you can start to get these kind of pedal steel sounding hammer-ons, and to me that works great over rock and roll. It works great in blues. It works great in country. Jazz maybe not so much, but you can use these licks in a lot of different ways. So now, just as you play the jam track, when the chords change, start by playing this little pattern. I'm going to go ahead and play through it without the jam track. I'll just tap my foot, but I wanted you to have one final version of me playing it, so you know how to practice it. And then I want you to try and start extrapolating some licks out of that. If you've got another song you want to play along with, another jam track or whatever, even if it's in a different key, that's okay. You can do that now that you know how it all ties to these chord shapes. All right, so here we go. Starting with the C chord. Alright, so practice that. Practice connecting those chords using those arpeggios. Now, one other thing you might want to do if you just want to throw in a little spice to this thing is to take that, once you're up here to this C chord up here, you're right in position to play pattern 1 of the minor pentatonic scale, which I have in the blues lead course, by the way. I explain all the 5 different patterns, but you could easily at this point play some bluesy stuff. So you could go, then go down to your F, and then you could go back into, if your goal was to make it sound more bluesy, you could do that. So you don't have to just do one or the other. You can start mixing this stuff up now. You've got minor pentatonic, you've got major pentatonic, you've got the major scale. Now you've got chord shapes and different chord voicings. Don't get overwhelmed with it though. Just start by practicing this and then try to improvise over something. So in the part 2 video, we're going to work up a little melody. It's the melody I played in the intro. I'm going to show you how to do all that note for note and how to put some of this into practice. All right, I'll see you in part 2.